the center of power and growth and innovation and momentum is now sitting out of the GCC. GCCs are a tremendous opportunity. I mean, there's more than 150,000 jobs that are being opened every year.
Hi Vikram, it's great to have you here today. I have been so curious about GCCs. I've heard the term everywhere, and I'm so glad you're here to talk to us today about what GCCs are and what it means for job opportunities in India.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
So my first question is, of course, there's been a trend of Indians moving abroad for opportunities, right? But now there's a lot of Indians that are staying in India. What do you think GCC has had to do with that?
Yes, I think we're at a very interesting time where global opportunities are now within reach, irrespective of where you are. I think the pandemic made it quite real that you could live anywhere and work anywhere. And I think part of that extension has been the fact that today the best companies in the world want to build teams where the best talent is. And that talent today is in markets like India. And so what that has meant is global opportunities and opportunities to build the next version of some of the best companies in the world sitting right out of India. And GCCs or Global Capability Centers are essentially extensions of teams, are strategic capability hubs for most of these businesses, allowing professionals to do some incredible work and advance their careers. And so in many ways, for a lot of professionals, the idea of moving internationally on-site abroad was to seek opportunities that they wouldn't have had access to before. And those opportunities are now available to them in their backyard. And that's really what's happening in the market.
That really opens up possibilities across the board, right? Where do you think GCCs would thrive? What sort of sectors do GCCs function best in?
Yeah, so it's independent of sectors. Today, every industry, every company is becoming a technology company, which means there is a need to build teams that are proficient and experienced and skilled. And so whether it's retail or pharma or travel and transportation or aviation or healthcare or a bank, you're fundamentally building a technology company in disguise of whatever it is that you do. And which means that a global capability center then becomes a very strategic decision for you to transform yourselves into the next version of that industry. So that's really what's happening. It's industry agnostic. But more than just tech today, I think the idea of GCCs expanding out into representing the broader organization is really the trend that's exciting. So of course, you've got technology, but outside of that, we're seeing creative functions. So marketing, design, we're seeing customer-facing functions, whether that's customer success solutioning or customer support, finance and FP&A, IT, HR. Every aspect of an organization today is now represented in global centers. And this is driven by the fact that you've got access to talent that is extremely good at what they do. And so, in many ways, a GCC is going to become a natural extension or a way for a company to grow across all industries and all functions.
I think we really are heading towards becoming a global village in the true sense of the word. So let's talk about India specifically. You mentioned a whole host of jobs that could potentially come into play with GCCs. But within India specifically, what do you think GCCs are looking for when they look for talent in India?
Yeah, so there's obviously a huge demand for technology. That's in many cases the highest demand skills today for most organizations. We're seeing about a 70-30 split, tech and non-tech. Within tech, it's a lot of product engineering, data science, AI, ML, cloud, data security, infosec. So it's a lot about building the next version of many businesses. So in addition to this, of course, when you talk about non-tech, I spoke about some of the roles before, finance, marketing, design, analytics, HR, IT. So it's across the board. I think the other things that are sort of common to most GCCs is hiring talent that's typically, between 5 to 15 years of experience. Freshers or early graduates are not typically hired early on. We want to hire people who are experienced and who can hit the ground running. Probably one of the most critical trends is hiring global leadership out of GCCs. So we've got something like 5,000 global roles that have been hired out of GCCs in the last year or two, which means that you've got global functions today that are represented and managed out of GCC. And one of the examples we use is a Fortune 100, a very famous Fortune 100 retailer that has almost transformed from being a brick and mortar store today to being an online e-commerce giant. And an entire $20 billion a year e-commerce business is run entirely out of their GCCs, which is phenomenal when you think about the fact that the center of power and growth and innovation and momentum is now sitting out of a GCC. So it truly is, I think, in many ways, a globalized workforce with not just volume, but also independence, autonomy, and a seat on the table, right? Which is what goes into making great teams.
Yeah, that sounds so exciting, and I'm sure there are a bunch of people that are really looking for opportunities like this, but probably don't know where to look. But something interesting you mentioned is that this is typically for somebody who has some amount of experience, and you did say 5 to 15. Can you talk a little bit about why that experience range is relevant? What happens to people with less experience or more experience? How are they impacted by this?
Sure. So the early days of standing up a global center is really hitting the ground running, building out strategic capabilities, adding a lot of depth to existing business functions. And in those cases, the idea of building a distributed team in a global center is really bringing on people who bring experience, expertise, knowledge, skills, can start to contribute almost from day one. And there is a preference towards hiring experienced or lateral hires. Now, that's not to say that, more younger professionals cannot join GCCs. There are many functions that will also hire early. And that trend is also changing. I think we're seeing companies coming in today with the mindset that we need to set up a global center early and have a very strong diversity in the type of professionals that we see. So I think that is a changing trend.
Okay.
But the idea of hiring lateral, hires is largely been due to the fact that this is building something very core and critical, and therefore you want to deploy people who've been there and done that.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a couple of examples. We work with a lot of very well-known product companies, some of them who are early unicorns in the startup world and now are industry leaders. So for some of these companies that are now looking to diversify, let's say, for example, building a payments platform, which is a natural extension for most companies today operating in some sort of commerce space. One of our customers today came to India to build a payments platform because the Indian fintech ecosystem is so mature.
Yeah.
And they almost hired 50 people, lift and shift from a couple of the leading fintech companies, and they had a team that was ready to go from day one. And time to value or time to market for their product was incredible. They were able to do it about 40% faster than they initially assumed. Another example is a customer of ours who is a very well-known company in the mobility space, and they wanted to build out, a consumer-facing product, a tech-based, app-based product, which they have no DNA to because they're an offline company. And they hired a small team, about 100 people, but those people are hired exclusively from, the Amazon, Google, Facebooks of the world. And for this company, the idea of hiring, top caliber talent from those sort of pedigree without having necessarily in their perception the brand was something that they couldn't even conceive. But the net output was they were able to create a product in quick time that could compete with the best in the world. And so that's really what happens, today in global centers is you're moving so quickly and you're able to hire the best, right? So the potential of what you can do is really limitless.
That actually sounds like a win-win for everyone. So tell me a little bit more about what somebody looking to get into the GCC space as an employee, what do they need to keep in mind? I'm sure skills are just one part of the equation, but how do you approach a global role? What sort of mindset do you need to have?
Yeah, great question. In our experience, GCC roles are in some ways, very holistic because, of course, your skills and technical proficiency is tested, but at the same time, you're also working in an environment that is distributed. You're working with teams around the world. So there is definitely a need to have a little bit more of that autonomous mindset, to have great communication skills, to be able to work in an environment where, sometimes you're working across time zones. cultural differences that you need to be aware of, being open to change, being open to ambiguity. So it's a fast-moving environment. In the early days of a global center, you're literally employee number 10. You're building a startup in a very large enterprise.
Yeah.
So you get the benefits of both. And, more importantly, it's about curiosity and hunger to learn and to be able to embrace and drive change. Now, these are all vague concepts, but, it becomes real when you go into an interview process.
Right.
Often you're not just being tested for skills. You're being tested for how you would fit into a company in terms of its larger culture. And you need to be able to demonstrate, your skills and your experience in a manner that can connect with, that sort of setup and that sort of distributed team.
Yeah.
So GCCs are a tremendous opportunity. I mean, there's more than 150,000 jobs that are being opened every year. And there are opportunities across the life cycle of talent, across a bunch of skills. And it's a tremendous opportunity from a learning perspective because, like I said, you have the opportunity to build something from scratch and do it in a manner where you're going to deploy it at scale. So I think that's really the exciting part for professionals looking to work for a GCC.